this, we have to talk about what's called the call stack. Okay? One function could call another. Because that function could call another, then return. Because we can do that however many times we want, we need a way to get back to where we were after the return, after that call is finished. Okay? So we have to get back to the state where the values of all local variables are sort of associated with what's going on in this code and where in the program. So the call stack is what does this. Okay? Method variables, like those variables of parameters and names within the code of a method, live on what's called the call stack. When a method calls another, there's something called an activation record passed on the stack. Now this sounds all horribly complex, but a few basic principles will help you understand why this is relevant and will actually clear up uncertainties, I think. Okay? And most importantly, operationally, you'll sometimes encounter call stacks in error message, and in fact in debuggers that we're going to be looking at. And occasionally you'll see it in AnyLogic, okay, revealed. So let's consider this code for perform work. We have these couple lines of code. Got a variable referring to the mother. Got a variable referring to an offspring. We reported that happy event. We're about to call this. We're about to call this method, and we pass it two pieces of information, namely offspring and mother. Okay? Okay. Now, when we call that, we are now going to be in the code for establish offspring connections based on mother's connections. Okay? This is the code for that. And it turns out it's not as horrible as we might have thought, at least not right now. But you'll notice this call also calls offspring.connectTo. It actually makes a call itself to another method. So in short, what we have is something like this. Perform birth call this guy. This guy calls connectTo. And then this is going to go back to that, and then this is going to go back to that. Okay? This has to do with the call stack. Okay, so this is associated with the call stack here. Okay? Unfortunately, the highlights didn't show up too well here. But there's some variables associated with perform birth. This and offspring and mother. Okay? So let's go look at that just in the code here so we can see this. Perform birth is here. And we'll look at the code. Here's the code for perform birth, just to remember it. I'd say there's 3 variables around in this method, okay? You'll notice this method did not take any variables explicitly as so-called arguments or parameters. There's therefore 3 variables around. Mother, that's a variable we created here, right? It's a variable. Offspring, it's a variable here, right? What's the third variable that's around? What's the third variable which I can refer to in this code? In fact, I do refer to in the code. In the very first line, I refer to another variable called, this is actually a class name for person, but there's a variable referred to there. Okay, that's the one I'm creating. So there's mother, there's offspring, there's a third one. This. That's a variable name. It just happens to name this one that's implicit. It's sort of, it's me. It's ask about me. Okay, so there's, in other words, this activation record. There's a reference to this. That's me. Okay, it's up there, that one there, the right one. Mother actually is assigned to the value for this. So in other words, whatever reference this had was referring to, mother now refers to. So it's referring to that same one, right? Referring to that one in the upper right. This, if that's me, if that's this, then it becomes mother because the code just assigned to it here. Whatever was in this, whatever value this referred to, now mother refers to. Mother's got to also refer to this. And then offspring might refer to this. This is the baby, maybe, right? This could be the baby. So this is the mother. And then, you know, initially that baby doesn't exist. Not quite tall enough. And Initially, that baby doesn't exist. Joyous news. It comes into the world. And so offspring refers to that baby in that method, in perform birth. And then perform birth says, okay, now I've got to call this establish offspring connections based on mother's connections, right? That's this whole thing where it calls this one here, right at this point in the code. And it's going to pass it as arguments, offspring and mother. The references to offspring and the reference to offspring and the reference to mother, okay? So, as a result, offspring and mother are now live in established offspring connections based on mother's connections. Let me just go show that here. Established offspring connections based on mother's connections. You'll see it right here. See, it says function arguments. So in other words, this is saying establish offspring connections based on mother's connections. Saying, I'll do my work for you, but you got to give me two things. Okay? Give me two things, buddy. You got to give me a reference to the offspring. If you want me to establish the offspring's connections, you have to tell me who the offspring is. That's one piece of information I need. And secondly, if you want me to establish their connections based on the mother's connection, you've got to tell me who the mother is. I need to know that information to do my job. So those are declared as arguments, as parameters, formal parameters to this method, okay? Called formal parameters. And so this is saying, okay, for me to do my work job, you got to give me this. I'm not going to do my job unless you give me that. Okay? So in fact, that's in fact what you saw happen. When this guy was called, when perform birth called this guy, it gave it two values for those, right? So when we make this call, there's actually code here for this establish offspring connections based on mothers. There's two variables because we provided a value for each of those as part of the contract to do its job. There's a value for this and a value for mother. In other words, variables that are provided immediately, and then there's another variable called this that's provided as well. Now, I actually didn't bother specifying this. It probably should have, but this because this is a method called an object, there's actually a value for this as well. So offspring refers to this one, and mother refers to that one. Okay. But you have to realize this offspring doesn't care directly about the fact that there's another one named offspring here, okay? I could have labeled this with a capital O and this with a lowercase o, or I could have given them the same names. They don't interfere in any way. All that happened is the value for this got passed as the value for that. So this could have had whatever name. Let me see if I can illustrate this in the code. I could have just as easily called this, watch this, to illustrate the point. I could have just as easily done this. Well, here, let me put it this way. Instead of saying offspring, I could have called it child, right? And in the body, then I'd have to refer to child, right? And child, and that will work just as well. From the point of view of perform birth, whatever it's named these things is immaterial. It can name it whatever it wants. It can name it offspring, sure, no problem. It can name it child. It's a different meaning for, it's a different sort of variable than this offspring. It just happens to have the same name. It needn't have the same name. Okay, so this is the activation record. And then what happens here is this thing calls connect to, okay? Establish offspring connection actually calls connect to here. And it calls it on the child, or on the offspring, okay? When we do that, what is this going to refer to? It's going to refer to which one of these two? Remember, this is for the mother, this is the offspring. So what is it going to refer to in that connect to? It's going to refer to what? Inside this call, what is this going to be referring to? It's going to be referring to, yeah, it's going to be referring to the child. To the child. And it also passed it this, which is actually referring to happens to refer to the mother. So but we should probably call that, it should really say child connect to mother, okay? So it says establish a link between the baby and the mother, so that would be clearer if we just did that, okay? So, there's this thing called the call stack, and every time we make a call, something gets put on the call stack. When one call calls another, it puts something on there. The things up here don't really interfere with the things down here in any way. Things in these upper levels, they don't bother the things down here. And when this is done, this will return here. And when this is done, it will return here. And so on, all the way down. Let's reinforce the previous points. So again, if we had a method, and this is how in Java we declare these things. You saw in AnyLogic, folks, that the way in which we declare formal parameters is here. The way in which we declare arguments is here. On Java, if we want to declare our own little Java, this is how you do it. You say double A. My method, these are the parameters here.